This is not a story meant to scare you. It's a confession that was never meant to be heard. What you're about to listen to is real, or at least, it was real to the person who lived it. Welcome to True Horror Confessions. If you're brave enough to keep listening, subscribe now. Because once these stories begin, they don't let you go. The town that stayed inside after dark. I've spent 4 years trying to forget what I saw in Millbrook. 4 years of therapy, 2 different psychiatrists, a brief stint on medication that made me feel like I was watching my life through frosted glass. None of it worked. The memories don't fade. If anything, they get sharper with time, more detailed, more impossible to dismiss as imagination or breakdown, or any of the other comfortable explanations I've tried to wrap around them. So I'm done trying to forget. I'm done pretending it didn't happen. I'm going to write it all down, every detail I can remember. And maybe then, I'll finally be able to sleep through the night without waking up to the sound of that siren echoing in my head. I moved to Millbrook in the fall of 2019. I was 28 years old, recently divorced, looking for a fresh start somewhere far from the city where my marriage had collapsed and my career had stalled. The divorce had been ugly, the kind that leaves scars you can't see, and I needed to get away from everything that reminded me of the person I used to be. I'd been working as a freelance journalist, mostly fluff pieces for lifestyle magazines and local interest stories that nobody read, the kind of work that pays the bills but doesn't feed the soul. I'd pitched my editor on a series about small-town America, hoping to find something meaningful to write about. Something that would remind me why I'd gotten into journalism in the first place. The forgotten places, the communities that time had passed by, the people who stayed when everyone else left. She liked the idea, gave me a modest budget and 6 months to produce something worth publishing, and wished me luck with what she clearly considered a fool's errand. Millbrook wasn't my first choice. It wasn't even my 10th choice. But the other towns I'd contacted either didn't want a journalist poking around or had already been covered by writers with bigger platforms and better credentials. I'd sent out dozens of inquiries, received dozens of rejections or non-responses, was starting to think the whole project was a mistake. Then Millbrook said yes. The mayor, a man named Harold Cruz, responded to my inquiry within hours, practically begging me to come. "We'd love to have you," he wrote. "Millbrook has stories worth telling. We just need someone willing to listen." I should have wondered why he was so eager. In my experience, small towns either wanted nothing to do with journalists or wanted to use them for free publicity, neither of which involved the kind of enthusiasm Harold Cruz was showing. I should have asked more questions about what kind of stories he meant, what he was hoping I would find, why a town that had apparently been ignored by the media for decades was suddenly so desperate for attention. But I was desperate too, desperate for a project that would justify my existence, desperate to prove I could still do meaningful work, and I didn't look too closely at the gift horse that had wandered into my inbox. The town was about 4 hours from the nearest major city, deep in the rural heart of the state, surrounded by farmland that had mostly gone fallow and forests that seemed to press in from all sides like they were trying to reclaim the land that had been taken from them. The drive out there was unsettling in ways I couldn't articulate. Miles and miles of empty road with no other cars, no signs of life, just fields and trees and the occasional abandoned farmhouse slowly being swallowed by vegetation. The GPS lost signal about halfway there, and I had to navigate by the handwritten directions Harold had sent me, following roads that got progressively narrower and less maintained until I was driving on what was essentially a dirt path through the woods. The main road into town passed through miles of empty fields and abandoned barns before the first buildings appeared. A gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1972, with pumps that still had analog dials and a flickering sign that said "Open" in letters that had faded to a pale, sickly pink. Then a feed store with a hand-painted sign, a church with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left, a few houses that could have been lifted straight from a Norman Rockwell painting if Norman Rockwell had painted places that were slowly dying. The downtown, if you could call it that, consisted of a single main street lined with brick buildings that had seen better days, their facades cracked and weathered, their windows dark. A diner, a hardware store, a small grocery, a bar called the Rusty Nail. Maybe 1,000 people lived there, according to the census data I'd looked up before arriving. It felt like fewer. It felt like the kind of place where people came to disappear. I'd arranged to rent a room above the hardware store from a man named Gus Patterson, who owned the building and ran the store below. He was in his 60s, heavy-set, with a face that looked like it had been carved from weathered wood. He didn't smile when he shook my hand, didn't make small talk, just handed me the key and told me rent was due on the 1st of each month. "One thing," he said as I was heading up the stairs with my suitcase. "You'll hear a siren sometimes, around sunset. When you hear it, make sure you're inside. Don't go out again until morning." I laughed, thinking it was some kind of local joke, a hazing ritual for newcomers. "What, is there a curfew?" He didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just looked at me with eyes that had something in them I couldn't identify, something that might have been fear or might have been pity. "Just make sure you're inside," he said. That's all. I forgot about the conversation almost immediately. I had work to do, people to meet, a story to research. I spent my first few days wandering the town, introducing myself to shop owners and longtime residents, trying to get a sense of the place and its history. Everyone was polite, everyone was welcoming, but there was something underneath the pleasantries that I couldn't quite pin down, a tension that seemed to live in the pauses between words, in the way people's eyes would flick toward the windows when the light started to fade. I noticed other things too, small things, things that probably meant nothing but accumulated in my mind like sediment. The way the streets emptied out as evening approached. Not gradually, the way you'd expect in a quiet town, but suddenly, like someone had flipped a switch. One moment there would be people walking dogs, kids riding bikes, the normal rhythms of small-town life. The next moment, nothing. Empty sidewalks, empty porches, curtains drawn across every window, the way no one would answer their door after dark. I tried once, my second night there, knocking on the door of a woman I'd interviewed that afternoon who'd invited me to come back for coffee. No answer, no sound from inside, just silence, and the feeling of being watched from behind the darkened windows. The way the animals behaved. There were dogs in Millbrook, cats, the usual assortment of small-town pets, but I never saw them outside after sunset. Never heard them barking at night, the way dogs do in every other place I've ever lived. The nights in Millbrook were silent in a way that felt unnatural, oppressive, like the town itself was holding its breath. And, of course, the siren. I heard it for the first time on my third evening in town. I was in my room above the hardware store, typing up notes from the day's interviews, when a sound cut through the quiet like a knife. It was a siren, but not like any siren I'd ever heard before. Not the wail of an ambulance or the blare of a fire truck. This was something older, something that seemed to come from everywhere at once. A low, mournful tone that rose and fell in a pattern I couldn't quite follow. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, then stopped as abruptly as it had started. I went to the window and looked out at the street below. Empty, completely empty. The lights were on in the buildings across the way. I could see the glow behind the curtains, but not a single person was visible. Not a single car moved. The town had gone still, like a photograph, like a moment frozen in time. I remembered what Gus had told me about staying inside, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of unease. Not quite fear, not yet, but something adjacent to it. The sense that I'd stumbled into something I didn't understand, something the residents of Millbrook knew about and weren't telling me. I stayed inside that night. I told myself it was because I was tired, because I had work to do, because there was no reason to go out after dark in a town with nothing open and nowhere to go. But part of me, the part that recognized the wrongness of that silent street and that strange siren, knew the real reason. I was afraid. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. The next morning, I asked Gus about the siren. He was behind the counter of the hardware store, sorting nails into bins, and he didn't look up when I spoke. "It's just a signal," he said. "Lets people know it's time to head home." Time to head home from what? Everything closes at 5 anyway. He shrugged, still not meeting my eyes. "It's how things are done here. Always has been. But why? What happens if someone stays out after the siren?" He stopped sorting. His hands went still, hovering over the bins of nails, and for a long moment he didn't speak. When he finally looked at me, there was something in his face I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not annoyance. Warning. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to, he said. Just follow the rules and you'll be fine. That's what everyone does. That's how we get by. He went back to sorting nails, and I understood that the conversation was over. I should have left then. I should have packed my bags and driven back to the city and pitched my editor on a different story, a safer story, one that didn't involve mysterious sirens and towns that went silent after dark. But I was a journalist. Asking questions I didn't want answers to was literally my job. And there was something about Millbrook that had gotten under my skin, something I couldn't let go of, a mystery that demanded to be solved. So I stayed. And I kept asking questions. Over the next few weeks, I interviewed dozens of residents. I talked to farmers and shop owners, teachers and retirees, people who had lived in Millbrook their whole lives, and people who had moved there from elsewhere. I asked about the town's history, its economy, its traditions. I asked about the siren. Everyone gave me the same non-answers. It's just how things are. It's always been this way. Don't worry about it. The words varied, but the message was consistent. This is not something we discuss. This is not something you need to understand. Follow the rules, and everything will be fine. But sometimes, in unguarded moments, people let things slip. An elderly woman named Mabel, who ran the small grocery store, mentioned that her husband had been taken 20 years ago. When I asked what she meant, she went pale and changed the subject. A farmer named Earl, who I interviewed at his property on the edge of town, told me that the siren had been sounding for as long as anyone could remember. My grandfather heard it, he said. His grandfather heard it. It's older than the town itself. A young mother named Sarah, who I met at the diner, told me that she never let her children play outside after 4 o'clock, even in summer when the sun didn't set until 9. Better safe than sorry, she said, and when I asked safe from what, she just shook her head and asked for the check. I started keeping a notebook dedicated to these fragments, these half-revelations that hinted at something larger. I wrote down every strange detail, every inconsistency, every moment when someone's mask slipped and I glimpsed the fear underneath. The notebook filled up faster than I expected. The more I learned, the less I understood. The siren wasn't connected to any emergency service. The town had no curfew on the books, no ordinance that required people to stay inside after dark. Whatever was happening in Millbrook, it wasn't official. It was something else, something older, something that existed outside the normal structures of law and government. And people had disappeared. That was the thing I kept coming back to, the detail that wouldn't let me rest. When I dug through old newspaper archives at the small library, I found references to disappearances going back decades, people who had gone out after the siren and never come back. The articles were sparse on details, attributed the disappearances to accidents or runaways or simple mysteries that were never solved. But there were too many of them, too many people vanishing in a town this small. I became obsessed. I know that now. Looking back, I stopped sleeping properly, stopped eating regular meals, spent every waking hour trying to piece together the puzzle of Millbrook. My editor called to check on my progress, and I gave her vague assurances that everything was going well, that I was gathering great material, that the story would be worth the wait. I don't think I believed any of it. I think I knew, even then, that whatever I was uncovering wasn't something that could be published in a lifestyle magazine. The breakthrough came 6 weeks into my stay, on a night when I finally broke the rule I'd been following since I arrived. It wasn't intentional. I'd been at the diner late, interviewing the owner, a man named Pete, who'd grown up in Millbrook and had stories about every family in town. We'd been talking for hours, and I'd lost track of time. When I finally looked at my watch, it was past 7. The siren had sounded while we were deep in conversation, and I hadn't even noticed. Pete noticed. His face went gray when he realized what time it was, and he practically pushed me toward the door. "You need to go," he said. "Now. Right now. Go straight to your place, and don't stop for anything." "Pete, it's fine. I'm just going across the street." "Don't stop," he repeated. "Don't look around. Just go." He closed the door behind me, and I heard the lock click into place. I stood on the sidewalk outside the diner, and for the first time, I experienced Millbrook after dark. It was quiet. That was the first thing I noticed, the thing that hit me before anything else. Not just quiet, but silent. Not the comfortable silence of a small town at night. Not the peace of a place where people have gone to bed and the world is resting. This was something else entirely. No crickets, no wind, no distant sound of cars on the highway, no dogs barking, no cats prowling, no animals of any kind making any sound at all. The kind of silence that doesn't exist in nature. The kind of silence that feels manufactured, intentional, like something had reached out and smothered every sound the world was supposed to make. The streetlights were on, casting pools of yellowish light on the empty sidewalk, creating islands of visibility in an ocean of darkness. Beyond those pools, nothing. Not normal darkness, not the comfortable darkness of a clear night, but something thicker, denser, like the shadows had substance, like they were made of something solid that pressed against the edges of the light and waited for its chance to flood in. I started walking toward the hardware store. It was maybe 50 yards away, a distance I'd covered 100 times without thinking, a distance that should have taken less than a minute to traverse. But that night, it felt like miles. Every step seemed to take forever. Every second stretched out until I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, could hear my own breathing loud in the unnatural silence, could sense something watching me from every dark window and every shadowed doorway. And then I heard something else. It started as a whisper, so faint I thought I was imagining it, a sound at the edge of perception, like wind through leaves. Except there was no wind and there were no leaves. Just that whisper, coming from somewhere I couldn't identify, growing slowly louder as I walked. I kept moving, faster now, my eyes fixed on the door of the hardware store, willing myself not to look around, not to search for the source of the sound, not to acknowledge that anything unusual was happening. The whisper got louder, closer. It wasn't wind, it was voices, many voices, overlapping, speaking in a language I couldn't understand, saying things I couldn't quite hear. They seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the shadows between buildings, from the darkness beyond the streetlights, from the very air around me. They were saying something, trying to communicate something, and some deep, primal part of my brain was desperately trying not to understand what it was. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran the last 20 yards to the hardware store, fumbled with my key, and practically fell through the door. I slammed it behind me and locked it and stood there in the darkness of the store, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The voices stopped. Just like that, as soon as I was inside, they stopped. The silence that followed was different from the silence outside, normal, safe. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my room with all the lights on, watching the window, listening for sounds that never came. When dawn finally broke, I felt like I'd aged 10 years. That was when I decided I needed to find out the truth. Not for the story, not for my career, but for myself. I needed to understand what was out there in the dark, what the people of Millbrook had been hiding from for generations. I started my investigation in earnest the next day. I approached it like any other story, with interviews and research and careful documentation. But there was a desperation to my work now that hadn't been there before. I'd experienced something I couldn't explain, and I needed answers. The first real breakthrough came from an unlikely source, the town's historical society, which turned out to be a single room in the basement of the library, staffed by a volunteer named Agnes, who was at least 80 years old and had the memory of someone half her age. She had white hair pulled back in a severe bun, glasses that magnified her eyes to an almost comical degree, and a way of looking at you that made you feel like she was reading your thoughts. She was reluctant to talk at first, giving me the same non-answers everyone else did, deflecting my questions with practiced ease. But I kept coming back, day after day, bringing her coffee and pastries from the diner, building rapport, earning her trust. Finally, on my third visit, after we'd talked for hours about nothing in particular, she showed me something. She led me to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room, produced a key from a chain around her neck, and pulled out a journal. It was leather-bound and ancient, the cover cracked and faded, the pages yellowed and brittle with age. The handwriting inside was cramped and difficult to read, The ink faded to a pale brown that required squinting to decipher. It was written by one of the town's founders in the 1,840 seconds, a man named Josiah Cruz, the great-great-great-grandfather of the current mayor. Agnes let me photograph the pages, made me promise I would never reveal where I'd gotten them, and told me that what I read would either satisfy my curiosity or drive me away for good. "Most people who learn the truth leave," she said, her eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made me want to look away. "They pack their bags and drive away and never come back. The ones who stay learn to live with it. They accept it as part of life here, the price we pay for existing in this place. But everyone has to make that choice for themselves. No one can make it for you." The journal told the story of Millbrook's founding, and it wasn't the story I'd expected. It wasn't the story that was printed in the brochures at the visitor center, or taught in the local schools, or told to curious outsiders who asked about the town's history. The town wasn't built on farmland, as the official history claimed. It was built on the site of something older, something that had been there long before European settlers arrived, long before any human beings walked this continent. The founder, a man named Josiah Cruz, described finding ruins in the forest when he first surveyed the land in the spring of 1,843. Stone structures, he called them, arranged in patterns that didn't match any architecture he'd ever seen. Circles within circles, spirals that led nowhere, walls that seemed designed not to keep things out but to keep them in. The stones were carved with symbols that made his head hurt to look at, that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed directly, that left after images in his vision for hours after he looked away. And, in the center of the ruins, a pit, a hole in the ground that seemed to go down forever, deeper than any natural formation, deeper than any well or mine shaft could possibly go. It was perfectly circular, lined with stones carved in those same impossible symbols, and when Josiah dropped a pebble into it, he never heard it hit bottom. He waited for 5 minutes, 10, an hour, and the sound never came. The pit just swallowed the pebble and everything else that was dropped into it, giving nothing back, revealing nothing about what waited in its depths. Josiah should have left. He wrote that himself, in passages that seemed to tremble with regret, the handwriting becoming shaky and uneven as he described his decision. He should have taken his family and his followers and found another place to settle, somewhere far from the ruins and the pit and the feeling of wrongness that seemed to emanate from that place like heat from a fire. But the land was good. The soil was rich. The water was clean. They were tired from months of travel, low on supplies, facing a winter that would kill them if they didn't find shelter soon. He convinced himself that the ruins were just remnants of some long-dead civilization, nothing to worry about, nothing that would interfere with their plans to build a new life. They built the town. They prospered, at first. The land produced abundant crops. The hunting was good. The winters were survivable. More settlers arrived, drawn by reports of the town's success. And within a decade, Millbrook was thriving. Josiah wrote about those early years with something approaching happiness, describing the growth of his community, the birth of his children, the satisfaction of watching something he'd built flourish. And then the disappearances started. The journal described them in detail that made my stomach turn, that kept me awake at night for weeks after I read it. People who went out after dark and never came back. People who were found the next morning, or what was left of them, scattered across the fields like they'd been torn apart by something with claws and teeth, something that had taken its time, something that had enjoyed the process. People who simply vanished, leaving behind only their clothes and a smell that Josiah described as like meat left too long in the sun, sweet and foul and wrong in a way that makes the soul recoil. The townspeople tried everything. They formed hunting parties, armed with rifles and torches and the desperate courage of men protecting their families. Nothing. They built walls, reinforced their doors, kept fires burning all night to ward off whatever was stalking them. Nothing. They set traps, dug pitfalls, stationed watchmen at every corner of the settlement. Nothing worked. Whatever was taking them couldn't be caught, couldn't be fought, couldn't be reasoned with. It came in the darkness, silent and unstoppable, and it fed, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The deaths weren't random. Josiah eventually figured that out. The thing in the darkness chose its victims. It watched them, studied them, learned their habits and their weaknesses. It took the ones who were careless, the ones who stayed out too late, the ones who wandered too far from the safety of the settlement. It took the curious, the brave, the foolish. It took the ones who tried to understand it, who tried to fight it, who refused to accept that some things are beyond human comprehension, until someone proposed an alternative. I don't know who first suggested it. Josiah's journal didn't say, or maybe that page had been torn out, removed by someone who didn't want the full truth preserved. But at some point, the townspeople stopped trying to fight and started trying to negotiate. They found a way to communicate with whatever lived in the pit, whatever came out when the sun went down. They made a deal. The details were vague, written in language that seemed designed to obscure more than it revealed. But the essence was clear. The thing in the darkness wanted to feed. It had always wanted to feed, would always want to feed, and nothing the townspeople could do would change that. But it could be satisfied with less. It could be convinced to take only what it needed, to leave the rest alone, as long as certain conditions were met. Stay inside after dark. Don't look at what moves in the shadows. Don't speak of it to outsiders. And once a year, on the longest night of the year, give it what it asks for. The journal didn't specify what that meant. I didn't need it to. I'd seen the patterns in my research, the disappearances that clustered around the winter solstice, the absences that were explained away as accidents or runaways, or people who simply decided to leave. The town had been making sacrifices for almost 200 years, and whatever they were sacrificing to was still there, still hungry, still waiting in the darkness for anyone foolish enough to break the rules. I should have left after reading the journal. Any sane person would have. But I wasn't sane anymore, not really. I was in too deep, too consumed by the need to understand, to see for myself what the people of Millbrook had been hiding from all these years. The winter solstice was 3 weeks away. I spent those 3 weeks preparing with a focus that bordered on obsession. I bought supplies, flashlights with extra batteries, a camera with night vision capability, recording equipment that could capture audio and video in low-light conditions. I researched the town's geography exhaustively, identifying the location of the ruins Josiah had described by cross-referencing his journal with old property maps I found in the Historical Society archives. The ruins were about a mile from town, hidden in a section of forest that had been left untouched for almost 2 centuries. The pit was still there too, according to the fragments I'd pieced together from various sources, covered over with a stone cap that was only removed once a year. I plotted routes and backup routes and emergency escape plans. I mapped the forest using satellite imagery I downloaded before my phone lost signal. I bought hiking boots and dark clothing and a thermal blanket in case I had to spend the night outdoors. I was going to see the truth for myself, document it, prove that I wasn't crazy, prove that everything I'd experienced and suspected was real. I told no one what I was planning. The residents of Millbrook had kept their secret for almost 2 centuries, passing it down from generation to generation, protecting it from outsiders with a discipline that bordered on religious devotion. I knew they wouldn't appreciate me trying to expose it. I knew that if they found out what I was planning, they would stop me, one way or another. So I kept up my cover as a journalist working on a human interest story, continued my interviews, pretended everything was normal. But I watched. I paid attention. And the closer we got to the solstice, the more I noticed the town changing. People became quieter, more tense. Conversations that had been friendly became clipped and perfunctory. The looks they exchanged when they thought I wasn't watching grew more significant, more weighted with meaning I couldn't parse. Store owners started closing early. Children were kept indoors. The streets, which were usually quiet after sunset, became positively deserted by mid-afternoon. Preparations were being made. I could feel it, even if I couldn't see exactly what they were. The town was getting ready for something. Something big, something terrible. On December 20th, the day before the solstice, Mayor Cruz invited me to dinner at his home. It was presented as a friendly gesture, a chance to discuss my progress on the story, but I knew there was more to it. The timing was too perfect, too deliberate. Harold Cruz was a direct descendant of Josiah Cruz, the town's founder. His family had lived in Millbrook for almost 2 centuries, had been part of whatever was happening here since the beginning. If anyone knew the full truth about Millbrook, it was him. His house was on the edge of town, a large Victorian that had been in his family for generations. It sat on a slight hill, overlooking the forest where the ruins waited, and as I approached it in the fading light, I couldn't help but wonder if the location was intentional, if the founder had built there specifically to keep watch over the pit, to be the first line of defense between the town and whatever lived in its depths. Harold welcomed me warmly at the door, his handshake firm, his smile wide and genuine seeming. He was in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of face that inspired trust, the face of a small-town mayor who'd spent his life serving his community. He showed me around the house with obvious pride, pointing out family heirlooms and historical artifacts, introducing me to his wife Eleanor and their teenage daughter Sophie. They seemed normal, happy, like any family preparing for the holidays. We ate dinner in a formal dining room, surrounded by portraits of Crew's ancestors going back generations. The food was excellent, homemade and hearty, and the conversation was light. Harold asked about my research, my impressions of the town, my plans for the article I was supposedly writing. I gave carefully vague answers, revealed nothing of what I actually knew or suspected, played the part of the oblivious journalist gathering color for a puff piece. After dinner, he invited me into his study for brandy. It was there, surrounded by old books and older portraits, that he finally addressed the elephant in the room. "You've figured it out, haven't you?" he said, settling into a leather chair across from me. Or at least part of it. There was no point in lying. I'd spent weeks trying to uncover the truth, and here was someone offering to confirm it. I know about the founder's journal. I know about the ruins, the pit, the deal. I know people disappear on the solstice. He nodded slowly, swirling the brandy in his glass, watching the liquid catch the firelight. He didn't seem surprised or angry. If anything, he seemed relieved, like a man who'd been carrying a heavy burden and was finally being given permission to set it down. "Most people who come here don't look that deeply," he said. "They accept the surface, the small-town charm, the friendly faces. They don't ask why we do what we do, why we've always done what we do. You're different. I knew you were different the moment you arrived. I'm a journalist. Asking questions is what I do. And now that you have answers, what are you going to do with them?" I didn't have a good response to that. I'd been so focused on uncovering the truth that I hadn't thought much about what came after. "I want to see it," I said finally. "Whatever's out there, whatever you've been protecting this town from, I want to see it with my own eyes." Harold set down his glass. For a long moment, he was quiet, staring at something I couldn't see. "You won't like what you find," he said. "No one does. But if you're determined, I won't stop you. Just know that once you see, you can't unsee. Once you know, you can't unknow. The choice you make tomorrow night will stay with you for the rest of your life, however long that turns out to be." He told me where to go and when. The old ruins, the ones Josiah had described, were still there, hidden in the forest about a mile from town. The pit was still there too, covered over with a stone cap that was only removed once a year. Tomorrow night, at midnight, the town would gather there for what they called the giving, and I was welcome to watch, but stay hidden, he warned. "Don't let it see you. Don't let it notice you. And whatever happens, whatever you hear, don't make a sound." I thanked him for his honesty and left his house feeling like I was walking to my own execution. That night, I barely slept. I lay in my bed above the hardware store, listening to the silence, thinking about what I was about to do. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to leave, to pack my bags and drive away and never think about Millbrook again. But another part, the part that had driven me to journalism in the first place, the part that needed to know, wouldn't let me go. December 21st, the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. I spent the day pretending everything was normal. I ate breakfast at the diner, made small talk with Pete, took a walk around town to clear my head. The residents seemed different that day, quieter than usual, their faces drawn and pale. They knew what was coming. They'd known their whole lives. As sunset approached, I gathered my equipment and headed out. I'd mapped a route through the forest that would take me to the ruins without passing through any area where I might be seen. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty streets, when I slipped out of town and into the trees. The forest was different from what I'd expected. The trees were old, older than the town, their branches twisted in ways that seemed almost deliberate. The undergrowth was thick and tangled, full of thorns and roots that caught at my feet. And there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, that grew stronger as I got closer to my destination. The smell of rot, of decay, of something dead that wasn't quite done dying. I found the ruins just as the last light faded from the sky. They were exactly as Josiah had described them, stone structures arranged in patterns that hurt to look at, covered in symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when I tried to focus on them. At the center was the pit, covered by a massive stone cap that must have weighed several tons. Around the pit, torches had been set up, unlit, waiting for the ceremony to begin. I found a hiding spot behind a fallen tree, close enough to see but far enough that I hoped I wouldn't be noticed. Then I waited. The townspeople started arriving around 11. They came in small groups, families mostly, their faces grim and determined. They carried torches, which they lit from a central fire that someone had started near the pit. The flames cast dancing shadows across the ruins, making the carved symbols seem even more alive. Mayor Cruz stood near the pit, directing people to their places, speaking in a low voice that didn't carry to where I was hiding. His wife and daughter were there too, standing close together, their hands clasped. By midnight, the entire town had gathered. 1,000 people, maybe more, standing in concentric circles around the pit, their torches held high, their faces illuminated by flickering light. Then the ceremony began. Harold Cruz stepped forward and began to speak. His voice was different now, deeper, more resonant, filled with a power and authority I hadn't heard before. He was reciting something, words in a language I didn't recognize, words that seemed to vibrate in the air and make my teeth ache. The syllables didn't fit together the way normal language should, didn't flow naturally from one sound to the next. They felt forced, unnatural, like human vocal cords were never meant to produce them, like the language itself came from somewhere that didn't follow our rules of sound and meaning. The crowd joined in, their voices rising and falling in unison, a chant that built in intensity until the very ground seemed to shake. The torchlight flickered and danced, casting writhing shadows across the ruined stones, making the carved symbols seem to move and pulse in time with the chanting. The air grew thick, heavy, charged with something that felt like electricity but wasn't, something that made the hair on my arms stand up and my heart pound against my ribs. And then they removed the cap from the pit. It took 12 men, working together, to slide the massive stone aside. The stone must have weighed several tons, yet they moved it with surprising ease, as though something was helping them from below, as though whatever waited in the pit was eager to be freed after a year of confinement. What was underneath was exactly what I'd expected and nothing like what I'd imagined. A hole in the ground, perfectly circular, descending into darkness so complete that the torchlight couldn't penetrate it. The darkness didn't just absorb the light. It seemed to actively resist it, pushing back against the flames, creating a boundary between the world I knew and something else entirely. Looking at the pit made my eyes water, made my head throb with sudden, sharp pain, made something deep in my chest clench with a fear I'd never experienced before, a primal, animal fear, the kind that bypasses conscious thought and goes straight to the most ancient parts of the brain, the kind of fear our ancestors felt when they heard predators moving in the darkness outside their caves, the kind of fear that doesn't have words, that can only be expressed as a desperate, overwhelming need to run. Something was down there. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, but I could feel it. A presence, vast and ancient and hungry, rising up from depths that shouldn't exist, approaching the surface for the first time in a year. The chanting stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, oppressive, suffocating, and then they brought out the sacrifice. I don't want to describe what I saw. I've spent 4 years trying to forget it, and I'm not going to put it into words now. I'll only say that it was a person, a living person, and they didn't go willingly. I'll say that what happened next took longer than it should have, and that the sounds will stay with me until the day I die. When it was over, the crowd dispersed. Quietly, efficiently, like they'd done this 100 times before. The stone cap was replaced, the torches were extinguished, and within an hour, I was alone in the ruins, with nothing but the smell of blood and the memory of what I'd witnessed. I don't remember walking back to town. I don't remember climbing the stairs to my room or locking the door or collapsing on my bed. I remember darkness and silence and a feeling of contamination that no amount of time would ever wash away. I left Millbrook the next morning. I didn't say goodbye to anyone, didn't explain my sudden departure, didn't even finish packing. I just got in my car as soon as there was enough light to see the road and drove, as fast as I could, as far as I could, until the town was just a speck in my rearview mirror and then nothing at all. I stopped once, about an hour out, to vomit on the side of the road. Then I kept driving. I told my editor that the story hadn't panned out, that there wasn't enough material for a meaningful article, that small-town America was more boring than I'd expected. I told my psychiatrist that I was dealing with stress from my divorce, that I was having trouble sleeping, that I needed something to take the edge off. I told everyone the same lies, the same half-truths, because I knew that no one would believe what I'd actually experienced. I knew that if I told the truth, they'd think I'd had a breakdown, that I'd lost touch with reality, that I needed to be hospitalized and medicated and watched. Maybe they'd be right. I've wondered about that in the years since Millbrook. I've wondered if I really saw what I think I saw, or if my mind constructed an elaborate fiction to explain something that was actually mundane. Maybe the ceremony was just a local tradition, a harmless ritual that I misinterpreted because I was primed to see horror everywhere. Maybe the sacrifice was an animal, not a person, and my traumatized brain filled in details that weren't there. Maybe. But I know what I saw. I know the sounds I heard. I know the look on the faces of the townspeople as they watched something I can't describe, do something I refuse to remember. Whatever happened that night was real as anything I've ever experienced, and no amount of therapy or medication or willful denial will change that. Sometimes I think about going back, about exposing what I saw, bringing journalists and investigators and police, and forcing the world to acknowledge what's happening in that small town in the middle of nowhere. I've drafted articles and letters and emails. I've compiled evidence, organized my notes, prepared presentations for anyone who might be willing to listen. But then I remember Harold's warning. Once you see, you can't unsee. Once you know, you can't unknow. And I remember something else, something that's haunted me more than anything else from that night. When the thing in the pit was feeding, when the sacrifice was being made and sounds I never want to describe were echoing off those ancient stones, I saw the faces of the townspeople. They weren't horrified. They weren't even sad. Not really. Some of the older ones had tears running down their cheeks, and the mother of the sacrifice was being held back by her husband, her sobs muffled against his chest. But underneath the grief, underneath the tears, there was something else. They were relieved, because for another year, they were safe. For another year, whatever lived in that pit would leave them alone, would let them go about their lives, would let them pretend to be a normal town with normal problems and normal futures. The sacrifice wasn't a tragedy to them, not really. It was a transaction, a price they paid willingly, year after year, generation after generation, for the privilege of survival, for the chance to live another day, another season, another year in this place that their ancestors had chosen and that they couldn't leave, bound to it by blood and history, and the terrible knowledge of what would happen if they broke the bargain. And the worst part, the part I can't stop thinking about, the part that wakes me up at 3 a.m. covered in sweat and shaking, is that I understand. I understand why they do it. I understand the calculation they've made, the logic that justifies the unjustifiable. If it was my family, my children, my life at stake, what would I be willing to sacrifice? What wouldn't I be willing to sacrifice? If the choice was between losing one person a year and losing everyone, between a controlled offering and a rampage of violence that could take dozens, hundreds, everyone, what would I choose? What would anyone choose? I don't have an answer to that question. I've thought about it every day for 4 years, turned it over and over in my mind, tried to find the flaw in their logic, The moral argument that would prove them wrong. I can't find one. I can condemn what they do in the abstract, can tell myself that there's never a justification for human sacrifice, that some lines should never be crossed, no matter the cost. But I wasn't raised there. I didn't grow up knowing what they know, seeing what they see, understanding from childhood that the alternative to compliance is extinction. I'm not sure I want one. Millbrook is still there. The people are still going about their lives, running their shops, raising their families, keeping their secret. The siren still sounds at sunset, and the streets still empty, and the darkness still holds whatever it's always held. And every December 21st, the longest night of the year, they gather in the ruins, and they give it what it asks for, and they buy themselves another year of peace. I could stop them. Maybe. I could go to the authorities, make noise, force an investigation. I could bring in the FBI, the state police, investigative journalists with bigger platforms than mine. I could blow the whole thing wide open, expose what happens in Millbrook every December 21st, make it impossible for them to continue their terrible tradition. But what would that accomplish? The thing in the pit wouldn't go away just because outsiders showed up asking questions. It wouldn't disappear because someone wrote an article about it or because law enforcement started poking around. It would still be there, still hungry, still demanding its due. And without the ritual, without the sacrifice, without the carefully negotiated bargain that had kept Millbrook intact for almost 2 centuries, it would take what it wanted anyway. Not one life, but many. Not a controlled offering, selected and prepared and given according to ancient protocols, but a rampage. The kind of violence that Josiah described in his journal. The bodies scattered across fields, the disappearances that happen nightly instead of annually, the complete destruction of everyone and everything in the thing's territory. The people of Millbrook have made their choice. They've lived with it for almost 200 years, passed it down from parent to child, maintained the bargain their ancestors struck when there was no other option. They're not monsters. They're just people, ordinary people, who found themselves in an impossible situation and did what they had to do to survive. Who am I to tell them they're wrong? Who am I to take away the only protection they have against something that has been feeding on human beings since before recorded history? Who am I to sentence 1,000 people to death because I find their solution morally uncomfortable? So I stay silent. I keep their secret. I let them continue their terrible bargain with whatever lives beneath their town, because the alternative might be worse. Because sometimes there are no good choices, only bad ones and worse ones. Because sometimes the thing that keeps you alive is the same thing that makes you a monster, and you have to choose whether to live with that or die with a clean conscience. Millbrook chose to live. I can't bring myself to condemn them for it, but I write this anyway. I write it because someone should know. Someone should understand what's out there, what hides in the forgotten places, what small towns do when no one's watching. I write it because I need to get it out of my head, need to transfer this weight to someone else, need to believe that the burden of this knowledge can be shared even if it can't be lifted. I write it because I've been carrying this alone for 4 years, and I can't carry it anymore. The nightmares are getting worse. The flashbacks are getting more vivid. The sense that something is watching me, waiting for me, has grown from an occasional feeling to a constant presence, a shadow that follows me wherever I go. I write it because if something happens to me, if I disappear or die under mysterious circumstances, I want someone to know the truth. I want someone to be able to trace my steps, understand what I discovered, carry on the warning even if I'm no longer here to give it. Maybe no one will believe this. Maybe everyone who reads it will dismiss it as fiction, as the ramblings of a disturbed mind, as a creative writing exercise gone too far. That's fine. That's probably better, honestly. Better that people read this and laugh and move on than read it and believe and go looking for proof. Because if you go looking for proof, you'll find it. And then you'll be like me. Then you'll know what I know, see what I see, carry what I carry. Then you'll understand why the people of Millbrook do what they do. And that understanding will eat away at everything you thought you knew about the world and your place in it. I've been writing for hours now. My hands are cramped. My eyes are burning. My coffee went cold hours ago. Outside my window, the city is finally starting to wake up, the first gray light of dawn creeping across the sky, the sounds of traffic beginning to build. I made it through another night. The siren I heard didn't bring anything to my door. I'm still here, still alive, still able to see the sunrise. For now, I don't know how many more nights like this I have. I don't know if the thing in Millbrook's pit has truly marked me, truly remembered me, truly decided that I owe it something for what I witnessed. I don't know if the siren I heard was real or a product of my traumatized mind. I don't know anything for certain, except that I'm tired and scared and ready to finally let this story out into the world, and I write it as a warning. If you ever find yourself in a small town where the streets empty at sunset, where no one goes out after dark, where the residents smile too wide and change the subject when you ask the wrong questions, leave. Don't investigate. Don't ask questions. Don't try to understand. The understanding is the trap. The curiosity is what feeds it. Just leave. Get in your car and drive away, and don't look back and don't ever return. Some places are not meant to be understood. Some secrets are not meant to be uncovered. Some towns have made their peace with the darkness, have learned to live alongside it, have accepted the price it demands as simply the cost of survival. Because some secrets are better left buried, some truths are better left unknown, and some towns have been keeping their bargains with the darkness for longer than you can imagine, longer than recorded history, longer than human memory. Millbrook taught me that. It taught me that there are things in this world that exist beyond our understanding, beyond our ability to fight or comprehend, things that were here before us and will be here long after we're gone, things that we can only appease, never defeat. I hope you never have to learn it for yourself. But if you do, if you find yourself standing in ruins older than memory, watching a ritual that should be impossible, feeling the presence of something that defies explanation, remember what I'm about to tell you. Don't make a sound. Don't let it see you. And whatever you do, don't look into the pit. Don't let your eyes be drawn to that perfect circle of darkness, that absence that seems more real than anything around it. Don't try to understand what waits at the bottom, what has waited there for countless millennia, what will continue waiting long after we're all dust and forgotten. Because if you look, it looks back. And once it sees you, once it knows you're there, once it has your face and your scent and the particular signature of your existence burned into whatever passes for its memory, you become part of the calculation. You become a potential offering. You become something it might ask for someday, when the time comes and the price must be paid and the town needs someone to give to the darkness. I looked, just for a second, just a glance, curiosity overriding self-preservation in that moment of absolute terror. But I looked, and sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone and the silence stretches out around me like a living thing, I feel it looking back. I feel it waiting, patient and eternal, beyond time and distance and any barrier the physical world might offer. I feel it remembering me, thinking about me, wondering when my number will come up and someone will lead me to the pit and give me to the darkness that has been hungry since before the first human drew breath. Maybe that day will never come. Maybe I'm just paranoid, traumatized, broken by what I witnessed in those ruins on the longest night of the year. Maybe the thing in Millbrook has forgotten about me, moved on to other prey, other potential offerings. Maybe I'm safe here, in my apartment in a different city, surrounded by lights and noise and the comfortable anonymity of urban life. But I don't think so. I don't think things like that forget. I don't think they move on. I don't think they ever stop watching, ever stop waiting, ever stop wanting what was shown to them and then taken away. So, I wait, and I remember, and I write this story, hoping that someone will read it and understand and stay far away from small towns with strange sirens and streets that empty at sunset. Hoping that my warning will save someone else from making the same mistakes I made, from asking the same questions, from uncovering the same truths that have haunted me for 4 years and will haunt me until the day I die. Stay in the cities, stay in the light, stay away from the places where the old things still live, where the old bargains are still kept, where the darkness is more than just the absence of light. Stay away from towns where people speak in half-truths and look over their shoulders and change the subject when you ask the wrong questions. Stay away from places that feel wrong, that make your skin crawl, that trigger those ancient survival instincts we all carry but have learned to ignore in our comfortable modern lives. Trust those instincts. They're there for a reason. They've been keeping our species alive since before we had words, since before we had fire, since before we had anything but the ability to sense danger and the wisdom to run from it. Trust me, I've seen what's out there. I've seen what hides in the forgotten places, what sleeps beneath the soil in towns that time forgot. And it's not something you want to see for yourself. It's not something you want to know about, to think about, to carry in your memory for the rest of your days. This is my warning. This is my confession. This is the truth about Millbrook, and I'll carry it with me until the day I die. Until the day something comes for me, whether it's natural death or something else, something that remembers my face and knows where I am, and has been waiting patiently for the moment when it can collect what it believes it's owed, which might be sooner than I think. Because last night, for the first time in 4 years, I heard the siren. I was in my apartment, in a city 300 miles from Millbrook, surrounded by the sounds of traffic and neighbors and all the normal noise of urban life. It was around midnight. I was trying to sleep, failing as usual, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about the things I always think about when the lights go out. And then I heard it. That same low, mournful tone, rising and falling, cutting through all the other sounds like they didn't exist. That same ancient warning, calling people inside, calling me inside. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then it stopped, and the normal sounds of the city came flooding back. And I lay there in my bed with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself I was dreaming. I told myself I was having a flashback, a PTSD episode, a stress-induced hallucination. I told myself all the reasonable explanations, all the comfortable lies that might let me believe I was safe, that Millbrook was far away, that whatever lived in that pit couldn't reach me here, but I could feel it. In the silence after the siren stopped, in the darkness beyond my window, in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, I could feel something watching me, something patient and old and very, very interested in the person who had witnessed its ceremony and lived to tell about it. I don't know what it means. I don't know if it's real, or if I'm finally losing my mind completely, or if the thing in the pit has decided to collect what it believes it's owed. I don't know if I have days left or years, or if I'll wake up tomorrow and this will all seem like a bad dream that I can eventually forget. But I know this. I'm not going outside tonight. I'm staying right here, with the doors locked and the lights on and this story typed out on my screen, saved and backed up, and ready to be sent to everyone I can think of who might read it and understand and spread the warning further. And I'm hoping, praying to whatever God might be listening and might be more powerful than the thing in Millbrook, that when the sun comes up tomorrow, I'll still be here to see it. That I'll still be alive, still be me, still be able to walk out into the daylight and pretend for another day that the world is normal and safe and comprehensible. If you're reading this and I'm gone, you'll know what happened. You'll know where to look, who to ask, what questions to avoid asking. You'll know that the things I wrote about are real, that Millbrook is real, that the bargain they've been keeping for almost 2 centuries is still in effect. And you'll know to stay away, forever, because some places don't let go of the people who've seen their secrets. Some things don't forget the faces that have looked into their depths, and some bargains, once witnessed, draw you into their orbit, whether you want to be there or not. I witnessed one of those bargains. I saw what the people of Millbrook do to survive. I looked into the pit when I was warned not to, and now the pit is looking back. Stay safe. Stay in the light. Stay away from small towns with strange sirens and streets that go silent after dark. And if you ever hear a sound like the one I heard, if you ever feel that ancient warning vibrating in your bones and telling you to hide, to run, to get inside and stay there until morning, listen to it. Because whatever made that sound has been doing this for a very, very long time. And it knows exactly what it's hunting. I'm going to publish this now, send it out into the world, and then I'm going to try to get some sleep. Maybe tonight I'll dream of something other than that pit and those symbols and that sound that I can still hear echoing in the hollow spaces of my mind. Maybe tonight I'll finally rest. Or maybe not. Maybe sleep will bring me back to those ruins, back to that ceremony, Back to the moment when I looked into the pit and something looked back. Maybe I'll spend another night walking through that memory, reliving every terrible detail, waking up with the taste of blood and smoke on my tongue. Either way, at least I'll have done this. At least I'll have told someone. At least the truth will be out there, waiting for whoever needs to hear it. Stay safe out there. Pay attention to the places that feel wrong. Trust your instincts when they tell you to run. And if you ever find yourself in a town called Millbrook, or any town like it, turn around, drive away. Don't look back. Some places are not meant for people like us. Some secrets are too heavy to carry. And some darkness runs so deep that even looking at it can change you forever. I know. I looked. And I've never been the same. The sun is rising now. The city is waking up. The siren has been silent for hours. And the thing that might or might not be watching me from the shadows has retreated. At least for now. I survived another night. I hope you never have to count yours the way I count mine. Goodbye now. And please be very careful out there. The darkness is always much closer than you could ever possibly think it is.